Today is May 12, 2020, and this is episode number 7 of Blurred Laws and Life with me, your host, Richard Busch. I was going to begin today's episode by doing what I have done in the past, which is discussing various legal issues that I've been involved with or that are in the news before moving on to my interview. Just the other day, over the weekend in fact, Tesla filed a constitutional challenge against the county of Alameda regarding its refusal to allow Tesla to reopen its Fremont, California production plant. And I am also involved in a constitutional issue where I'm representing Eminem's music publisher, 8 Mile Style, against Spotify for alleged copyright infringement. And the constitutional issue implicates what is known as the Music Modernization Act. And it's a very interesting issue. It's a very interesting case. In some ways, it ties into the constitutional challenge that Tesla has raised that relates to the refusal of the county of Alameda to allow it to open its production in its plant there, while in neighboring counties, production is allowed to go forward. But that's going to have to wait, because on today's show, we have the pleasure of having the great David Hill. David literally created Fox Sports. He created the Fox Sunday NFL show. He has produced World Series, Super Bowls, Academy Awards. He was involved with the iconic Fox NFL Sunday football theme song, the Formula One theme, and I learned this during the interview, was the brains behind the yellow first down marker that we see and take for granted now in NFL football games, and many, many other important innovations and productions. So all things on this podcast will have to wait, be delayed for another week, except for one quick and very important item. Since today's podcast involves a lengthy discussion of NFL football, I would be remiss without mentioning that this past week, the legendary Don Shula, head coach of the Miami Dolphins, passed away. Don Shula was one of my first childhood heroes growing up in Miami, being a little boy in the early to mid 1970s. And I have a very funny Don Shula story to pass along. I thought this might be the right and only opportunity for me to tell this story. As I mentioned in my prior podcast, I grew up in Carroll City, and in a neighboring area known as Opelika, there was a college called Biscayne College, not too far from where I lived. And in fact, the Miami Dolphins trained at Biscayne College at the time. When I was a very little kid, my friend's parents would take us over to Biscayne College to watch the Dolphins practice. And then I would wait with some of my friends, and we would wait for the team to come off the field and get autographs. And I remember this like it was yesterday. I was waiting for an autograph, and Don Shula came walking up. I don't think I was more than 6 or 7 years old at the time. And he and Larry Zonka, in fact, great fullback for the Miami Dolphins. And I asked for their autographs, and they gave it to me. And then I said to them, asked where Bob Greasy was. He was the quarterback, because I wanted his autograph too. And Don Shula looked at me and he put his hand on my shoulder and he says, "Don't bother, son. He doesn't know how to write. He can't sign his own name." And they laughed and they walked off. And I remember that story like it was yesterday. So here is to the great, the one and only, the legend, who will forever live in the hearts of everyone, from Miami, Don Shula. So it's my great honor and privilege to have on the show this week David Hill, the great David Hill, who has received more than 33 Sports Emmy Awards and received the Pete Rozelle Radio Television Award for the Pro Football Hall of Fame. David was the second such person to receive that after the legendary Roone Arledge from Monday Night Football. And he's won many other awards, his incredible experience in the television area, and particularly in sports. And we're talking to David today about a lot of things. Hi, David. How are you?
Hi, Richard. Outstanding.
Well, David, thank you for being on the show today. And your accomplishments, speak for themselves. I thought we'd get started today by, since it was actually in the news yesterday, I think, the Monday Night Football announcing teams were unceremoniously axed, and I found them horrible to listen to and usually watch Monday Night Football with the sound off. Since you've worked with broadcasters at Fox Sports and you put together the incredible team of Howie Long and Michael Strahan and Terry Bradshaw and Jimmy Johnson, I just wanted to begin today by asking you first about your thoughts, if you have any, on that Monday Night Football team, and secondly, what it takes to put together a team that works on television.
Let me start with Monday Night Football. Monday Night Football was the brainchild of a guy who has been, I hold him up as the pinnacle of the development of sports television. I think that everyone that's come after the great Roone Arledge at ABC's Wide World of Sports is merely doing footnotes to what he did. And Monday Night Football really, the brainchild between him and Commissioner Pete Rozelle, introduced football really to America. It was so cleverly done. The Howard Cosell, the way it was produced, and it introduced America and American families to football, and it moved it out of Sunday afternoon. And as it went on, the decades went on, Monday Night Football was kind of the yardstick by which you judged how good a production was. Because what Monday Night Football did, it wasn't just a great football game, but it was this huge immersive experience. And I think when Hank Williams pulled everything together, when ABC took his song, All My Rowdy Friends, and turned it into the opening theme, that encapsulated it perfectly. And to watch what's happened to Monday Night Football, and it's just gone from being like the pinnacle to the basement. It just seems to me that whoever was there running it was asleep at the wheel. I don't want to be too critical of colleagues or my peer group, but it really was, no one had a clue, and it was all over the shop. Sunday Night Football on NBC under Dick Ebersol really then took the crown of a single game. But Monday Night Football needs to be revamped, needs to be redone, and commentary teams and the production need to get so much better. The second part of your question, an announcer is the most important part of what we do in sports broadcasting. And it doesn't matter how smart your graphics are, it doesn't how many cameras you've got. It really is all about the announcer, because our business is essentially human beings talking to human beings. And if the finding that talent and that skill, and it's something you really can't teach, is part and parcel of what it takes to do the job. I was very fortunate with Terry and Howie and Jimmy. But that was a period where I had 6 months to create a sports division. In 1994, Fox Sports did not exist. And I was brought out from London, where I'd been running Sky Sports, to start it up. So I had 6 months in which to put together everything.
Well, you're being a little too modest, I think, because I want to talk, and it's kind of a perfect setup to get into some of your background and how you've been able to do what you've done as far as putting together teams that work. CBS has had 20 or 30 years competing against your Fox Sunday NFL team to come up with a team that works. And they keep changing every year, and seemingly nothing works. But back in the day when I was a kid, the NFL Today on CBS had Brent Musburger and Jimmy the Greek and Phyllis George and Irv Cross, and that worked. And you put together a team that's worked for 25 years or longer. So I want to know, what is it in your background that gives you that sixth sense, that instinct to know what works and doesn't work. Because, it's just like life. When I meet somebody on the street, there are people that I meet and automatically you feel that chemistry with them, that you want to be their friend. And there's people that you meet that before they say a word, you never want to see that person again and, want nothing to do with them. Same with, music. You hear a song and boom, it works. And then you hear something else and it just doesn't work, and no one can bottle it. It's impossible to bottle. So really what I want to know is, what in your background, what in, your upbringing has allowed you internally to give you the instinct to know what works and what doesn't work?
Well, thank you for that. I'm very flattered. I'm lucky not to be encumbered with education. And I don't say that with so much tongue in cheek. My dad started life as a coal miner. My mum is the daughter of a coal miner. And when I was 15, 16, and I was educationally challenged, when I talk to college kids now and they say, what degrees do you have? I say, none, and they look at me horrified. And I say, the trouble was high school was just too hard. So I started work as a copy boy when I was 17 in newspapers in Australia, and I was very fortunate to get into television when I was 19. So I've been working in television all my life. And when I was growing up, I'm not a sports fan. We didn't have the money to actually go and watch sporting teams. I always played. My dad played semi-pro soccer. And so I was never a sports fan in the term that I religiously was addicted to a sport. So I look at sports differently. To me, sports was entertainment. And I always found that when I got into sports production fairly late, when I was about 31, 32, I'd been in front of camera for 10 years. One of the reasons, actually, that I didn't do well in high school was that I was in a quasi-rock band, spent far too much time mucking around with music and mucking around with rugby union. I don't know. It's Richard. It's one of those bizarre things that I've always found that life has a rhythm, and that you have to tune into the rhythm. And what happened with Terry and Howie and Jimmy was that I knew what I wanted to do. When I started Fox Sports, and I had literally I had 3 or 4 weeks. But I watched a lot of American television when I was in the UK. And it was that American producers treated sports as a requiem mass. I didn't see it as being solemn and sanctified. As I told you, I saw it as a huge entertainment. So what I wanted to do with Fox Sports and how I had to differentiate it was that I had to give it, it was not to be sanctified, it was to be entertaining. And I was very fortunate. I saw Terry Bradshaw on probably the final CBS pregame show with Greg Gumbel. And I thought, oh, my God, he is fantastic. I love him. And I've been told by people at Fox, don't hire Terry Bradshaw, he's dumb. Well, he's not. And then Howie Long came on. And then one of the greatest things that happened to me was that Jerry Jones fired Jimmy Johnson. And Ed Gorin, who was working with me at the time, knew Jimmy and went down to Dallas and signed him up. And the rest, as they say, is history. So it's being able to figure out if the person you're looking at to communicate with the public has got a passion. There's two things. They have to have a passion and enthusiasm for the sport and not be blasé, but they also have to have a desire to educate. I've always believed that one of the key things in sports television is to educate people about the game. And there's any given number of psychological reasons. Probably the most important one is that fathers or parents communicate to their kids, especially fathers, through sports. And so you never want the father to be sitting there as the son turns to him or the daughter turns and says, Dad, what's going on? And if the father doesn't know. So I always tried to get the announcers, and very successfully too, to tell them what was going on. And the final step of that, I guess, was when Mike Pereira, I was fortunate enough to hire Mike Pereira from the NFL. And if you watch an NFL telecast now, Mike is there to explain what's going on in the Byzantium rules of an NFL game. So I guess the answer to your question, it's all in the rhythms of life, being able to pick those up that you need.
You know, it's interesting. You know, you're talking to someone who grew up in sports myself. I grew up in Miami in the 70s and 80s. And from the time I was 4 or 5 years old, I was a huge sports fan, particularly football, because the Miami Dolphins, when I was very little, they were in their glory days. So I've been watching sports on TV forever. And what strikes me as interesting, and we talked about that a moment ago, and I mentioned it, is, as you said, it comes down to rhythm. But like you said, Howard Cosell and Dandy Don Meredith and Frank Gifford, they worked. And other sportscasters and other teams just don't work. And yet, when you say they try to educate, I remember there was a broadcaster, Todd Christensen, who was a former tight end for the Oakland Raiders, and he was a sports analyst for a while. But the criticism of him was when he tried to educate or teach, he spoke in big words. He spoke, tried to sound very intellectual and spoke above his audience, and his career kind of flamed out. And like I said at the beginning of the show, watching Monday Night Football, when I listen to Booger McFarland and the other guy, I can't remember his name right now, it's like, nails on a chalkboard. I watched the show many times with the sound turned off. It's just like some people have it and some people don't. And some people have the rhythm you mentioned and just some people don't.
I think the classic exponent of the great television host was Jim Mackay. And I go back again to Roone Arledge, that Arledge had the ability to see what was going to work in terms of communications. And what you want is a host that guys want to have a beer with them, women want to talk to them. And Jim Mackay, to me, summed everything up. But when you look at Roone Arledge's legacy, that what he did with Wide World of Sports, what he did with Monday Night Football, he actually managed to change it. And there's very few people have the ability or the skill or the gifts that Mackay had, that even Frank Gifford had, and of course the legendary Howard Cosell. You see, a lot of athletes think that there's some God-given right that when they finish their career, they automatically walk into a broadcast booth and pick up a mic. Well, they can't. There's very few people have the skill. Look at Troy Aikman. Troy Aikman was, there's a couple of greats like Chris Collinsworth, and I was fortunate to have Chris on Fox NFL Sunday for a while. He's absolutely fantastic at being able to read a situation and explain it. Same thing with Troy. Troy can do it, and there are a very few. It's interesting when you look at the numbers. There's like 0.1% of players who have played current and past in the NFL are working in media jobs. So it shows you that you can be a great athlete, but it doesn't make you a great communicator. One of the guys that I thought got away was Johnny Lynch. Johnny Lynch played with the Tampa Bay Bucks, and then he played with the Broncos, and he worked for Fox Sports for a while. And I thought John Lynch was absolutely fantastic as an announcer. He now has gone and you see what he did with the 49ers in the Super Bowl last year. Unfortunately lost, but there you go. So it's like, why are there 83 billion singers, and yet there's 5 who have been going for 5 decades? It's just one of those things that better it's done, the easier it looks. The same with singing, the same with writing, the same thing. You can look at any industry, and when they're doing it well, it just looks so goddamn easy, and then it's not.
It's interesting. In my profession as a lawyer, and I say this all the time, and maybe it's the same for you as well, but I always go by my gut instincts. Always by my gut instincts when I'm trying a case. I try to get into that rhythm, and I let my instincts about what to do and what not to do and how to handle things take over. And I try to do the same things with all aspects of my life, with business that I'm involved in, with people that I meet. And I'm wondering if at the end of the day, you just have a natural instinct that you knew that Terry and Howie and Jimmy and Michael would work, and you saw and you knew that you had something. Just like a great record producer. He hears it, he knows it, he sees it, and he can do it where many people don't see it. And the same is true in my profession. And maybe it's that at the end of the day. The secret to your success is that you just have that natural instinct and you've had it your entire career?
I think it's the rhythm. This is very nebulous, and I was only really first aware of it when I read years ago The World According to Garp. And there's a continual reference within there of don't fight against the undertow. Now, I grew up surfing, which was another thing that I wasn't studying. I spent a lot of time surfing. And you know that you cannot fight against the wave. You have to use the wave to do what you want. If you try and fight against the wave, you wipe out, and that's the end of it. And it's very much like life. And that's where I got this rhythm thing from. And I'm sure in your business, mixing law and music, that once you get into a rhythm of a court case, it's like doing a production that you feel that everything is going to work and you trust your gut. Now, the counterpoint to that is that most people have what I've christened as the worm of self-doubt. And what happens with the worm of self-doubt is that you get an idea in the morning, you wake up and say, that's what we're going to do. This is going to be terrific. And then you get in the car or you get in the train and you go, or the bus, and you go to work and you think, oh, actually, it's probably not that good. If I put it out at the office today, they're going to laugh at me and it's not going to work, whatever. And by the time like 5-6 hours have passed or a day's passed, you've talked yourself out of it. When you're in the rhythm, the worm of self-doubt does not exist. And so for you standing up in a courtroom and saying, I want to ask this question, I want to do that, or whatever, is exactly the same as the situation I found myself under in 94. I had 6 months to put it together. I was fortunate that I'd done 2 television startups and I knew what not to do. And I think that put me in such a fantastic position, because the thing that destroys most startup businesses is doing too much. And so I knew what not to do, but I knew what I had to do. And so I could just focus on that. And because I didn't have a chance to go back and start thinking, because everything had to be done. So I was in that rhythm, and that's why touch wood, everything worked out.
You know, that's a great story and great advice. Of all the things that you have done, what work are you most proud of?
Well, to be honest, I think it's probably inventing the score and time, the little box in the corner. It seems so obvious now; it's ubiquitous. But when I introduced it, when we started, I'd introduced it in England about 2 years before when I was working at Sky Sports, and it was perfect because it had the score and had the time, the two most key things in a game. So when I introduced it here on Fox Sports on our football broadcast, I got 5 death threats, and I was told by the FBI and the LAPD threat squad that I had to take them seriously. And when I said why, they said that because there's no spelling mistakes. So that's now become ubiquitous. I'm also very proud of the yellow downline that Stan Honey and I came up with.
That's amazing. You came up with that? I did not even know that.
It's our patent, yeah.
That's amazing.
So there are 2 things that are both very simple and very obvious that I'm proud of.
That's great.
Proud of that and the first downline. In terms of production, the 2 things I'm proudest of is when I produced the Oscars, the Oscars in 2016 with Chris Rock as the host. And I was very pleased with the way that went. Introduced a number of things. The one thing that I thought would take off but didn't was the thank you scroll. And it was, I put a scroll up where recipients of an Academy Award could thank, so that they could use their 45 seconds to say something meaningful. But I just repeated, I'd like to thank my cat groomer, and I'd like to thank the people that water my plants. And then the job that I was most proud of was Super Bowl 36, and that was after 9/11. And as an adopted American, shall I say, what I wanted to do. I knew how important the Super Bowl was around the world. I wanted to show the world that America hadn't lost a beat. And I think that working on that job with Jim Steig and the current commissioner, Roger Goodell, and the past commissioner, Paul Tagliabue, I think that was a show that when we finished, it was as good as it could be, especially at halftime with U2 and the names of those who died in the Twin Towers behind them. So that to me was probably the highlight of two different productions, one in sports, one in entertainment, the Oscars that I did, and Super Bowl 36.
Well, that's amazing. And I have two follow-up questions about what you just said. One is I'm fascinated by the yellow first down line, which now we take for granted in all these football games. What gave you the idea to do that?
Well, it's the key thing in the game, isn't it? It's making the first down. And you didn't really know, the public didn't really know if a team had made the first down just by watching it. And so Stan and I were talking, Stan Honey, who was the genius that came up with the glowing puck, and then we did a bunch of other stuff. And I said, is that possible? And he said, well, we'll see. And it was. And it makes football easy to understand if you're a foreigner. And talking of things American, it was doing that Super Bowl 36 that made me want to become a U.S. citizen, which I did, despite the fact of having an American wife and two very American daughters. But I delved into the civilization of this country, and I think that the Constitution and what created this great country was that I had to be part of. So it had a profound impact on me personally as well as professionally.
That's amazing. And of course, I remember that Super Bowl very well, and it was incredibly emotional. So that's an amazing thing.
Well, not only that, it was very interesting. It was the Patriots beat the St. Louis Rams, and that was the start of the Patriots' reign, if you will, with Super Bowls. So that it was kind of like there was a number of things that came out of that, plus the fact that everyone involved with that had this warm feeling of pride in that terrible, terrible, dreadful time.
Yeah, amazing. The other thing that I wanted to follow up with was, why did your production of the Academy Awards, why are you so proud of that when you've done, you've won 33 Emmys, you've done all these incredible things with Super Bowls and sports. Is it because it was just different, or was there something special about that particular Academy Awards that make you very proud?
Well, I was absolutely thrilled to be asked by Cheryl Burnett Isaacs, the president of the Academy, to produce the show. It had some problems in the last couple of years, and I think Cheryl wanted a television producer to do it rather than film producer to do it. So what is so wonderful about that is that when you produce a sports event, it's cast for you, and the scene is set and everything's done. And as a television producer, what you do is react to something that's happening. And the best production is transparent. If you notice what we're doing when you're watching a sporting event, we're not doing a good job. But with the Oscars, you start with a black room, and you have to stage it, and you have to fill it, and you have to work out the running order and how it works, and various bunch of other things. And I was very proud of that show.
That's great. Okay, moving on. Of all the World Series that you produced and you've seen, what is the best game?
The most exciting was Red Sox and Yankees. And I think I can't remember, 2005, 2006. But the Yankees were like 3-0. And it looked like the poor Red Sox, the curse of the Bambino and all that stuff. And it was going to go the same way. And something happened for the Sox to make it 3-1. And I remember walking out saying, the tide has turned. And they then went on to take the rest of the games. And it was so friggin' exciting that normally when you're working, you have to be icy cold because you have to be 3 or 4 minutes ahead of the action. But everyone got involved. It was so exciting. And Bill Webb, who was directing, the late, great Bill Webb, the best, in my terms, baseball director ever, just did this magnificent job. And it was like copybook stuff to watch.
How does a director affect a baseball production like that, since you mentioned Mr. Webb, Bill Webb?
Oh, vital. A director impacts everything. because it's the juxtaposition of shots that tells the story. And a lazy or a bad director is just going to be a mundane element. But a great director like the great Bill Webb, that he would go for extreme tight close-ups. So you saw the tension, you saw the angst. He had this incredible shot, I think it was in Yankee Stadium. Joe Torre's sister, I think, is a nun.
Yes.
And she's there with two of her colleagues sitting there with rosary beads clenched in their hands. And Webby had this, just picked that shot. And it's those things, they're the strawberries on the top of the basket of life, if you will, that actually make everything sing. And Bill Webb had that, and as all great directors can, could tell the story through a juxtaposition of shots.
That's great. So you mentioned the Super Bowl after 9/11, and it may be the same answer to this question, but what is the best Super Bowl you've ever seen that you produced?
That was remarkable. It was, and I can't remember which one it was because they all blend in, I'm afraid. But it was the New York Giants. Michael Strahan, number 82, was playing in that. And that was the incredible catch. And I can't remember who it was, and I should.
David Tyree.
That was unbelievable. And that is the great thing about sports. And there was a great baseball writer, I can't remember his first name, his second name's Angel, who said the great thing about this sport is that you wake up in the morning and read in the paper of things that happened the night before that had never happened in the history of the game. And that's why sports is this incredible social glue that keeps us together.
It really does. Since this show is focused on music in a lot of respects, and as you know, I handle a lot of different music court cases, and we talk a lot about those cases in this podcast, I want to talk to you now about music in connection with sports and the integral role that it plays. When we first spoke the other day, I told you we were talking about sports themes and sports shows and great music tied to them, and you can't think of the show without the music. And I was telling you that when I was growing up, like I said, in the 80s, and NBA basketball was actually on tape delay, CBS had the NBA basketball. I guess they had the entirety of it. And they had this great theme song that you went, I'm not a singer, but it went something like, you'll see the best in basketball when you watch the NBA, when you watch the NBA on CBS. And I swear to God, to this day, I can't watch a basketball game without thinking about that damn song in my head because I watched so much of it. And you put together this iconic Fox NFL Sunday music that was written by Scott Schreer, and you were also at Fox responsible for getting the Fox Formula One theme song. And you can't think of Fox Sports without those songs coming into your head. So I guess my question is, how important do you see music in connection with sports and these sports shows you've been involved with?
Absolutely vital. You're absolutely 100% correct that the music is an integral part of sports, and getting the theme right is key. And there's so many atrocious themes out there that when you chance on one, I've been fortunate enough to be involved with two great themes. One going back to 1977, I was starting a big sports production, and I didn't have the money to actually go out and find a composer. Back in those days, and for most of your listeners, there are things called records. They are black and round and have grooves on them. And back in the day, that television channels would buy library discs. And when you wanted a theme, you would sit there. And so I spent a day going through this record, these series of records, and I found one track called New Horizons, which was a documentary theme, which I took and put on the sports. And it's still going. It's still being used by Channel 9 in Australia, starting in 1977 now. What is it, 2020? So it's got longevity. The story of the Fox NFL theme, which is iconic, and I have heard stories, of course I haven't seen it myself, I've heard stories that strip clubs around the country use the theme to introduce all the young ladies to the patrons, which I've been told by a number of my colleagues. I knew the theme was vital, and I knew the theme was really, really important. and I knew that I couldn't rush it, and I knew that it had to come. And it's that's going back to the rhythm, that a couple of decisions that I got very close, and I had to delay because things weren't right. And I've known from the past, if you push them and you get the wrong thing or the wrong person or whatever, and it screws everything up. So I was very fortunate. I'd known of a guy called George Greenberg who'd done a lot of work for ABC Sports, worked for Wide World of Sports, and I loved his promos. A great friend of mine, a guy called Jeff Mason, who is one of the legends of the sports television industry. And when I was running Sky Sports in Britain, I said, can you get me some of these promos? I love them because I'm not going to say copy. I don't know if you're familiar with Tom Lear, the great mathematician and humorist, but he wrote a song about Nikolai Ivanovich, the Russian mathematician, which was plagiarized. Let no one else's work evade your eyes, but always please be calling it research. So I wanted to research George's promos. So he was one of the first people when I came out to the States and I had to start Fox Sports. I went looking for George, and I found him down in Florida, and we talked, and I told him what I wanted to do, and he was sufficiently boneheaded, I guess, to listen to me. So he started work. So I felt so comfortable knowing that I had George Greenberg doing promos and marketing and what have you. Anyway, so what was going to be the theme? So we talked about the theme, and I didn't have a clue and whatever. And one of the things I've inflicted on my 4 children are roller coasters. And just north of Los Angeles is Six Flags, which has these sensational roller coasters. And my son, who was about 10 at the time, or 12, I dragged him up there to ride the Batman ride. And we're standing there inching our way forward. This is like, I don't know, July or June. I know it was really hot. And we went through this faux village of Gotham, and I'd hated the music from the movie Batman because I'd grown up with the cartoon Batman, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And I'm listening to this, and it's gothic, and it's in a minor key, and I'm thinking, oh, God. Then I start listening to it, and I think, holy shit, this is really, really good. So I go and call George, who's in New York, and I said, listen, you know that friend of yours, Scotty, the mad drummer? He said, yeah. I said, well, why don't you, tell him that what we're going to do is what the Fox NFL theme is going to be, Batman's got a football team. And George said, what? So I told him, I can only imagine the conversation between him and Scott. And this lunatic Australian wants you to do a theme for the NFL that's Batman's got a football team. Anyway, about 2 weeks later, George has rung and said, listen, Scotty's got it. Come to New York. So I was in New York. And Scotty had 2 versions. And I said, listen, let's take the top 32 and drop it on version B. And that's it. And then Scotty took off and we put it down. He put it down in Utah. And then we're on air. It was like in about 2 weeks. And that theme's lasted 25 years.
And not only is it, as I understand it now on Fox NFL Sunday, it's now ubiquitous across all Fox Sports, isn't it?
Well, I love working with Scott, and I thought that he, like for a drummer, he's quite remarkable because he's very intelligent. That's a music joke, Richard. I'm sorry. and it was. So then we got hockey, and I'd been to see a thing called Stomp, and I said to Scotty, why don't we do a variation of the theme, but as the rhythm track, I'll get an audio guy to go and record noises, the sound of a hockey game. So the rhythm track is actually the sound of skates, and so that's the thing. Then we did baseball and whatever. And everything was from the roots of the Fox NFL theme. But as we moved through various other areas, that there was always an homage paid to that.
Amazing. That's an incredible story. And again, a testament to, your feeling about what's going to work and obviously what has worked.
Because an intro has to set you up. It has to put you into the emotion of the event you're about to see. And it's not just a musical statement. It's an entree. It's a welcome. I
Yeah,
was
like the
working.
old ABC Olympics theme song.
Yeah.
And, I also like Faith Hill's Sunday Night Football. I think that kind of does it too.
Well, I think what's happened is that what NBC has ended up for their Olympic theme is a combination of Leo Arnaud's Bugler's Dream, and then John Williams wrote an Olympic fanfare, and they've amalgamated them together, and it sounds absolutely terrific. But the thing I'm really pleased about is I was working for Formula One, and I wanted to get a Formula One theme that Formula One had used, especially on the BBC, and the basis of a Fleetwood Mac track, The Chain, and it's the bass riff, dung, 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 dung. And I wanted to give it a modern theme. And the guy that I went to see, Brian Tyler, who has written music for Fast and the Furious, and he's done video games, and I knew that he had the conscience of like virtually every millennial kid that had been to see those. And I wanted Formula One to have that kind of sound. And little did I realize that Brian was this huge Formula One fan. His dad was an architect who had designed one of the first Orange County tracks. And the track that Brian wrote for the Formula One theme is wonderful. And we put that down in London, and it was, and I think that Formula One fans are probably the most reactionary of the lot. And they all went, oh, this is different, this is different. Now, of course, they absolutely love it.
That's amazing. Let's go to a related area, which is we had a discussion the other day about infringement and copyright infringement. As you know, I'm usually on the side of the plaintiff, the party that is saying that there was copying, and you may have a different view of it. Let me ask this question. If CBS released theme music that was very close to your Fox NFL Sunday show, how would you feel about that?
I think the term is highly irate.
So what is your feeling about infringement cases? Have you followed them? Do you have a feeling
Yeah, I do.
about?
I first really became aware of it in the George Harrison case over My Sweet Lord. And I followed that case. I forget where I was. I might have been in England at the time. And I followed that, and I felt that it was not unfair is not the word, but there are so many notes. There's not an infinite number of notes. There are a finite number of notes, and there's a finite number of ways those notes can be put together. I think the key in any of these cases would be whether it's malicious or whether it's unconscious. And to me, it becomes like a foul on a sporting field, and you have to work out, a referee or an official has to work out whether or not that is a malicious foul or an unconscious foul. And so you're making subjective decisions. And I think that's the case. So that if I thought, or the judge thought, that George Harrison had thought, aha, I can make money out of taking whatever the track was and putting different lyrics on it, and did it maliciously, that's one thing. But if it was unconscious, I think it's another. Now, that's just my perspective, because I know how hard it is writing. And I think the greatest line I've ever heard about the creative process came from the great sports writer Red Smith from the New York Daily News back in, I think, the 50s. He said, writing a daily column is really easy. You sit down at your typewriter and wait for flecks of blood to appear on your forehead.
It's not easy. I'm going to have to disagree with you on something that you said, and I'd like to get your thought on this. So there is in the law, actually, the difference between willful copying and copying that's not necessarily willful. And the difference is in perhaps in some cases the amount of damages one can recover. But in fact, in the United States at least, there's no concept of innocent infringement letting you off the hook. If you copy it, and you're right, the George Harrison My Sweet Lord case started the concept of, or first recognized the concept of unconscious or subconscious, I should say, copying, that if you have actually copied some work because you heard it and it is therefore copyright infringement because you did copy it unlawfully, even if not intentionally. My view of that is that it's not fair to the original writer to let that new writer receive profits and money from a work that's not his, whether intentional or not. Do you disagree with that?
Well, it all depends in what kind of circulation the original piece of work was. That if it was a number one hit that everyone had heard and someone came out and ripped it off like 3 years later, sure. But it's what is the likelihood, and that was, I think, the basis in the case with George Harrison, that the claimant was a very well-known piece of music. But there has to be, and I imagine this would be put up as a defense, that how widespread that the broadcast of the original track was.
So let me interrupt you right there, because it's in fact true that one of the elements of a copyright infringement claim is you have to prove access.
Right.
So if you can't prove access, that is kind of how the law takes into account what you're saying, because if you can't prove access, even if it is substantially similar, the plaintiff loses. Right.
Well, that makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
That the person has to deliberately hear it, or has to have heard it, has to say, right, I'm going to plagiarize this, and then they go out and make money from it. So it's like it's a tough call. But I do take your point that if someone has done the original work, other people should not then make money from it without them coming to an arrangement to say, hey, listen, I screwed up here. I've just realized that I've taken your work. And I think it's the number of tunes that we listen to. You just think about our world today, that our world is from the moment we wake up to the moment we go to sleep is scored. We're listening to music on everything from commercials to, like, when I started doing documentaries 800 million years ago when pterodactyls walked the earth, you did not use music. It was like, no, we're pure. We don't use music. Bullshit. That music now is everywhere. I even got to the stage where I started putting music on football games. And I tried about five games about 4 or 5 years ago until I got bored. And we'd bring the music in, the appropriate music in, over the replay, and it worked really well. And I think that's the next step forward in sports broadcasting, to have scored appropriate music over the replays. But just getting back to my point, it's like everyone you see is wandering around with these little dark white earbuds in. Everyone's listening to music the entire time. And for a composer now, for someone coming into the business, starting writing songs, for them to sit down on a clean slate and write a piece without there being some influence from somewhere that they've heard, I think it's an impossible task.
Well, I'll say this about that. Influence alone doesn't equate to copyright infringement. And I can't let you off the hook that easily on the finite number of notes, because yes, while there are only 12 notes, there actually are an infinite number of combinations of the notes, chords, sounds, and to me, that's kind of like saying there's only 26 letters in the alphabet and a finite number of words, so that if you come close to copying Shakespeare or Hamilton, it's not copyright infringement because, So,
Mr. Busch, point very well made. Very well made.
Of all the great theme songs for sports shows, and we talked about many of them earlier in this podcast, whether it's yours or not, what's your personal all-time favorite and why?
It's got to be Scott Schreer's theme for Fox NFL Sunday. I think that to me, it satisfies all the requirements of a great theme. It's announcing something that's really important. It's announcing something that's really proud. And at the same time, it's letting you know that it's going to be fun. And I think that those elements in that, and a close second, I've got to say, is Brian Tyler's Formula One thing. Because Brian said, what do you want the theme to sound like? And I said, impending doom. And Brian delivered it in spades. It was fantastic. So my favorite two themes are both mine, and I hate the sound. I know I should say, oh, well, it was so-and-so and so-and-so, but it's not. It's Scotty Schreer's Fox NFL on Fox thing, followed very closely by Brian Tyler's Formula One thing.
And so I was told that you also created that great animation before Fox NFL football games that have like Transformer-like robots or that you create, which is an incredible thing as well. How did you come up with that?
It's one of those things that happen. I was blessed at the start. I had two absolutely fantastic graphic designers that did all the graphics and the look for Fox Sports. Jane Pryor, who I'd worked with in Australia and in Britain, and I got her across here because she and I worked together very, very well. And she hired out of Chicago a guy called Gary Hartley, who has been in charge, like when Jane left, Gary took over. And I can't remember how or when it turned up, but it just did. And I loved it. I had a little guy doing NASCAR, a little gopher called Digger, and he was animated and stuff. But I love all that. And I thought the robot, which is what he started off as. Then we decided to have a nationwide name the robot. What's his name? And God knows how many entries we got. But the predominant one was Cletus. So he is Cletus, and Gary and his team of artists have just made him better and better and better, and he's kind of grown. So he's now he's a very mature football robot now after 25 years.
Well, he's synonymous with Fox football, and it lets you know it's time for football. It's an amazing thing. Okay, last question, and this may be the most important question that I ask you in this entire podcast. Are you ready?
Yes, sir.
I know you still are in communication with the commissioner of the NFL, and I know we all want football in the fall. So from the great David Hill, will we have football, NFL football in the fall? And B, will we have a live Fox NFL studio show, or will we have to see Jimmy and Terry and Michael and Howie on Zoom?
I wish I had a succinct answer for both, but I don't. I think there's such a fear about a second wave of infections at the end of summer, whether or not that occurs or not. There's just so many things about this virus that none of us know, and I'm including the virologists that are discovering stuff like on a day-by-day basis. But my bet is, I can't say definitively, my bet is yes, football will get going. And I'm not sure what the thinking is about the studio show. But that's got to be very much a secondary consideration. And I got to tell you, if those guys are in a studio, or if those guys, one's on Mars, one's on Mercury, one's on Jupiter, and they were linked up, they would still be hysterical. So to me, it doesn't matter.
No, it doesn't. Well, listen, David, thank you so much. This has been a pleasure. The information you provided, the history of all these things that I didn't know. I didn't even know about the first down, that you invented the first down yellow marker. That's, just an incredible career, and it's been my pleasure and honor to have you on this podcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Richard. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you, and take care. That was really so much fun. Thank you again to David Hill. What a great guy he is. David and I both wanted to place on the podcast some of these iconic sports theme songs we discussed. So I went about trying to license them even though the use of those songs in this context would probably be considered fair use. Unfortunately, I was not able to get them licensed in time because of COVID-19 and people being out of their offices. So I will just have to add them to the podcast at a later date when I am able to get them licensed. Because, as I said, they might get me for something one day, but they're not going to be able to say, aha, Richard Busch playing unlicensed music. Copyright infringer. Nope, not going to get me for that. Have a great week and see you next week on Blurred Laws and Life.